It is 10:30. Welcome again, everybody. Get my slides live. Great, so thank you again for coming. People that are showing up for the first time, thank you. I appreciate you coming. For those that have been returning, that's great. Really helps to know people coming back. They're finding some of this, at least some of this content valuable. So thanks again for coming. And let's get started for session 4, scheduled transactions and reconciling. Got a lot to cover, so I'm going to jump right in. First, I got to cover the couple housekeeping notes. Once again, I'll remind everybody you can watch the previous sessions at banktivity.com/webinars. You can also find them on our YouTube channel. This session will be put up there as well later on today or tomorrow. I get this question a lot, so I'm just gonna keep saying it so everybody knows. I do want to let people know that I am looking at all the questions that come into the webinars inbox, and I have tried to incorporate some of those questions again into today's material. And I'll remind everybody that I am presenting today without looking at the chat or the questions or any of that that's going on, because it's just way too distracting to do that and present. But I will take some time again at the end to try and answer some questions. And I'm going to put out a kind reminder. If you could only put questions in the question chat box there, that will help me find material that's appropriate to respond to, as opposed to just some of the general comments that I see there. And also, my goal here is to try and answer questions that have to do with the subject matter we're covering now, and not necessarily individual questions about specific to one person's data set. All right, I'm gonna move along. So today, session 4, I'm gonna just do a quick review of payees and rules from last time, because I had at least one person I think that maybe was a little bit confused, and I wanna make sure everybody's up to speed. We're gonna cover a couple of follow-up questions from the previous webinars, and then we're gonna jump into scheduled transactions and reconciling. So this quick review. Here is Banktivity, and you're gonna import some transaction into Banktivity, right? And this transaction coming from the bank has this title, this description here that, it's kind of ugly. It could be cleaned up. Now, the Banktivity app has an existing list of payees. These payees are kind of like templates for transactions, and they're created behind the scenes as you edit your own data. And in the previous session, we showed where you can go in and look at these, and you can manage them manually if you want. But the idea is that there is this listing set of payees, and some of those also have import rules. So what does the app do when this transaction comes into it? Well, it looks at this description and says, hey, do we have anything, any kind of rules that'll work for data like this? Okay, and in this example, yes, we do. We found a rule for when this, jumbled up looking payee comes in. We found a rule that's appropriate, and so we're going to apply it, and then your transaction gets cleaned up and it just says Trader Joe's, and we apply the category groceries. So that's just a quick overview of sort of the mechanics of what happens during the import process with payees and import rules. All right, now just want to jump into a little follow-up from last week. These are some questions I had. One was, if I delete a payee from my existing payees, what happens to those transactions that have that same name? So kind of going off of that last little example I ran through, what if you deleted your payee that was called Trader Joe's, the category was groceries, would it then mess up all your existing transactions going back, all the way back into your data file? And the answer is no. They are not linked like that. So you can safely delete payees without affecting your transactions. One other question that came up about with importing, which we covered last week, was, what do I do? I get so many MFA prompts, and MFAs are these multi-factor authentication prompts. I'm sure you've all seen them. If not in Banktivity, then you've seen them when you've been logging into sites on the web. And it's these additional questions to verify your identity, right? So it might say, hey, text me a special code to my phone, and then you enter that code, or email me this special code, and then I'm going to enter the code, and then I'm going to be able to move past that screen. Or it might be, hey, what's your mother's maiden name, and you have to enter that in, right? Some other additional authentication besides a username and password. And with some banks, they're very aggressive about asking these additional authentication questions when Banktivity is connecting. And I just want to say that for those that feel like they're getting prompted too much, one thing you can do is go to Preferences, go to the Import tab, and there is an option of whether you want bank transactions to automatically be downloaded. I would suggest you turn this off if you feel like you're getting prompted for the MFA questions too much. And then if you turn that off, just know that in order to download your data, you're going to need to click that little circular arrow in the upper left corner of the toolbar. All right, moving on to scheduled transactions. So first, why are there scheduled transactions? And it's really because, a lot of your finances are fairly predictable. You have monthly bills. You might have some bills that are due every 6 months. Maybe you have a bill that's due every year, or maybe several bills that are due once a year. You probably get paid on a regular schedule. And so there's a lot of things that happen with your finances that are quite predictable. And that's really why we use scheduled transactions. Now, to understand how scheduled transactions work in Banktivity, we again are going to return to this notion of the payee. And I've said this several times, that it's like a template. And so you can see there's this little example here, the screenshot of a payee. And you can see that there's a title. This is for Bedrock. This is who you pay money to. There's a category of clothing, shoes. There's an amount. There's a transaction type. In this case, it's a charge. And we saw in the previous sessions that there can be import rules associated with this payee, so that when transactions that you're importing look similar to where the import rules apply, and they look similar to past things you've imported, then hey, clean up the transaction and make it look like this. Well, a payee can also be scheduled. So you can have a payee in the app that has all this information associated with it, the category, the amount, and so on. And you can say, you know what? I want this to happen every month, right? I expect this transaction based on this payee to happen every month, let's say on a certain date. And so payees can also be scheduled. And when we have a payee that is scheduled, we call that a scheduled transaction. So let's just jump into how do you create these scheduled transactions? Well, you can create them from an account. While you're looking at an account, you can select a transaction and say, hey, I want this to become scheduled. When you're setting up a loan, Banktivity asks you if you want to schedule a transaction for that loan. And in this case, it sets up sort of a special scheduled transaction. And I say it's special because it's one that you can't actually edit manually. It can only be edited through the loan interface. And the reason for that is because Banktivity does some special stuff to keep track of how much of that loan payment is going to go to interest and so on. You can also just create a scheduled transaction when you're managing the payees in the app. And you can also create them during budget setup or when you're editing an existing budget. So I'm going to jump into a short demo that just shows some of these ways that you can create scheduled transactions. Okay, so you see I have my my good old trusty My Finances document. And you can see there are a bunch of transactions, and I have a Visa account selected. And let's just say that this Amazon transaction right here is a monthly fee, right? Let's say this is some extended Amazon service. You can turn this into a scheduled transaction by selecting it. You go up to the transaction menu and just say, hey, make a scheduled transaction from selection. And when you do that, you will get this sheet that drops down where you can edit and verify all the information, for this scheduled transaction. You can see that it started on this date, and that's based on the date of the transaction. You want it to occur every month. It's going to be a withdrawal. You can associate tags with it. There's an amount. There's the account that you want it to post to, and so on. So that's one way. And if I hit done with this bill, behind the scenes, it's going to create this scheduled transaction. I'm just going to cancel that for now, though. Discard the changes. Okay, you can also create scheduled transactions by going to View, go to Payees, Schedules and Rules, right? And this is also, you can also get there by clicking on Settings, Payees, Schedules and Rules. And this is the interface where you can manage all your payees, your scheduled transactions, and the payees that have import rules. And so if I click all payees here, this is a list of every payee I have in this file. If I click scheduled transactions, this is just the subset list of the payees that have a schedule associated with it. And similarly, if I were to click import rules, these are the templates that have import rules. But I'm over here at scheduled transactions. You'll notice there's a plus button. I could click this. And again, you get this sheet where you can create a scheduled transaction. And so this could be, to AT&T. Let's say it was a phone bill, and you could enter in an amount and give it a category of utilities or cell phone, whatever. It's probably not out of your 401k. So you might choose, hey, I pay this through my Visa card, or sorry, my MasterCard. And then you could create a scheduled transaction that way. I also just want to mention that they can be created when you're doing budget setup. I'm not going to go into that right now because I really want to devote a significant portion of a session or a whole session to budgets, and we'll go into it there. And I mentioned they can be created during loans. Now, once you create these scheduled transactions, well, where do they show up, right? And I'm going to show you. If you go to the summary here, you can see these upcoming transactions, right? So these are all scheduled transactions that I've set up. Similarly, if you go to an account and you go to the summary, you would see any scheduled transactions for that particular account. So this credit card doesn't have any. And if we go over here and go to summary, you'll see this has one where you're paying your AT&T bill, and it's due in February. Additionally, you can go to the calendar, and your scheduled transactions will show up with a little clock next to them. And so they show up there. So those are some of the places that they actually just show up in the app. All right, I'm going to jump back to my slides. Don't worry, I have lots more demos to go into more scheduled transactions. But I just wanted to show kind of how you create them, and then where do they appear in the app. All right. So let's talk about different ways that you can schedule a transaction, okay? Well, all of our scheduled transactions, they repeat around at least one date. So for example, you could have a scheduled transaction set up monthly for the first of the month. You could have one that's on the 15th of the month, or every 3 months. You could have one that repeats on March 13th every year. You could have one that's set up to repeat around the 1st and the 15th of the month. Now, some of you might be thinking, hey, wait, 2 dates, how does that work? You said it repeats around a date. Well, the way that works is behind the scenes is we're really using 2 schedules to model that payee and when the transaction should occur. So the first schedule says, hey, I want this to repeat the 1st of the month every month. And then the second schedule would be, hey, I want this to repeat on the 15th of the month every month. So here is a little screenshot of what that interface looked like, and you can see there's 2 rows. Each one of these rows represents some kind of repeating schedule. This is taken from Banktivity, this screenshot, and you can see, we have one schedule for the 1st of the month and one for the 15th, and they repeat every month. And so that would be how you would get a scheduled transaction to occur on the 1st and the 15th of the month. Now, it's important to talk about what the scheduled transactions cannot do, because I know there are some limitations, and these are things that these are limitations not just theoretical that someone could hit, but I know that for tracking some scheduled transactions, this is one area where the software could use some improvement. So for example, you can't track the last day of each month, and that is because different months have different number of days in them. So if you say, hey, this is due the 31st of July, when June rolls around, it's not going to, June doesn't have a 31st, and so that doesn't work. Similarly, you can't repeat around a relative day of the month, right? So you can't say this is due on the 3rd Thursday of the month or the last Monday of the month. The app can't do that currently, right? Like I said, can't do it on the 1st Monday of each month. So I'm sorry, those are current limitations. I hope one day I get to present a brand new scheduled transaction feature where we can support these. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about scheduled transactions, more about their properties, kind of what they can do, what they can't do. So every scheduled transaction, it only ever posts to one of your accounts. Now, you could have a scheduled transaction that has one or more transfers in it, right? You could have multiple transfers if it was split, or it could have just one transfer. And in that case, it still only posts to one account, but it might affect the balances in several other accounts depending on how that scheduled transaction is set up. Scheduled transactions are going to show up in your budget, right? I mentioned that they show up in your summary views, they show up in the calendar, and their changes are tracked. Now this I've kind of reduced down to a single bullet point, but it's a pretty cool feature that's pretty unique in Banktivity. And that is, let's say last year in 2020, you had a scheduled transaction set up for your cell phone bill for $150. And then this year you upgraded your plan, or for whatever reason, you're now paying $200. And you edit your scheduled transaction for in January and make that change. If you go back and look at your budget for 2020, it will show you the old price, the old amount that you had for that scheduled transaction, the $100. And then if you look at your budget for the current year, the current month, it's going to show you that new amount. Let's say it's $200. And so behind the scenes, we track those changes that are made to the scheduled transactions. The idea behind that, sorry, oops. Got get back to these slides. Here we go. The idea about those changes is that it's supposed to just kind of happen behind the scenes, and you shouldn't have to worry about it. There's no really way to go in there and edit that. Just something that I did want to point out because this is the masterclass. The other thing you can do with scheduled transactions is be reminded about them. And I'm going to talk more about what does this mean? You can be reminded about them. So when you are editing a scheduled transaction, this is another screenshot from the app, you'll notice there's this checkbox. Remind me 7 days in advance about this scheduled transaction. When you tell a scheduled transaction you want to be reminded, you're basically setting that scheduled transaction up in the app so that you're going to need to take action on it. And whether that's posting it to your account, or you could skip it and say, hey, you know what, you don't need to post this to my account this month, just skip it. Now, the whole reason why we have this is most people want to be reminded about their scheduled transactions. But there are some people, and there are some situations, and this is totally valid, where they don't want to have to take action on their scheduled transactions, but they still want it to show up, let's say, in their budget. So they can see, oh yeah, this month I have to pay $150 for my cell phone bill, but you know what? That's just automatically deducted out of my Visa account. I don't need to actually be reminded to take action in the app, or be reminded to take action sort of in the real world and make sure that's paid. It's kind of on autopilot, but I want to capture it in my budget. We're going to talk a little bit more about that as well. So how do you take action on these scheduled transactions that you want to be reminded about them? So this all happens in the confirm scheduled transaction sheet. And in the next demo, I'm going to be showing you how to do that. So when you're looking at this confirmed scheduled transaction sheet, you'll see a list of your upcoming scheduled transactions, and you'll be able to post or skip them. And this also is, you can do this in iOS directly from the summary screen. And when you choose to post a scheduled transaction, it's going to insert it into the appropriate account based on whatever account it's going to post to. And if you choose to skip it, it's just going to advance the next due date for that scheduled transaction and not insert anything, into your accounts, and it won't affect your balance. Okay, I mentioned now these reminders. If you don't have a reminder set up, well, they appear in places, but you never take action on them. Right, and I kind of said this would be appropriate. Let's say you want to set up a budget. You want to capture your scheduled transactions in your budget, and you want it to affect the expected amount you're going to see in your budget, how much you expect to spend that month, but you don't want to have to take action. They'll also appear in the summary areas as well. So let's run through an example of setting up kind of a more realistic scheduled transaction. That is going to be our phone bill. Right, so this is I'm just going to call it utility for $200. You might have a different category that's, telephone or cell phone or mobile, whatever. But let's just say it's $200 and you want to be reminded about it. So I'll jump to this demo. Going to close this one and bring up this document here. So here is a very simple document that I have set up. It just has a single credit card in it, but I'm going to show you how you can set up this bill. So I'm going to go to settings, payee schedules and rules, click the plus button, and I'm going to say this is, say it's AT&T, and you pay $200, and I'll use the telephone cellular category. And you know what? This is going to be due. So this date here is when when you're first setting up a brand new scheduled transaction. This is the date of the next time you expect you're going to have to pay this. So in this case, it's going to be February. It's not a deposit, it is a withdrawal. And it's going to be every month, and it's going to post to my credit card. That's because I just pay it online through the credit card, and I'm going to hit done. Okay, and now you'll see here's this scheduled transaction. I know it's a scheduled transaction. That is a payee that has a schedule associated with it because I'm under the scheduled transactions tab here, and it shows up, and you'll see there is a little date here indicating the next time this is going to take place. So let's talk about just a typical workflow that might occur with this cell phone bill. I have this set up to just automatically be deducted from my credit card account. So there's two things that can kind of happen. One is you can go to this this button here. It says manage your upcoming scheduled transactions, and this is the confirmed scheduled transaction sheet I was talking about. And you'll see you get a presentation here of all your upcoming scheduled transactions. So you can double click this and edit the transaction if you want. And you'll also notice that there is a post button and a skip button and a couple other options to pay online and print a check for it. I'm not going to cover those right now. But let's say that you know this is going to happen, and so you want to post it to your account now. Now, you'll notice that this is exactly $200. A lot of times that's not really what your bill is. It might vary some each month. And so if you're going to post it, certainly make sure you know exactly what it's going to be. So I'm going to say it's going to be $201.48. Now I'm going to hit save, and then I'm going to hit post and done. And then you'll see that that transaction got posted to this credit card account. Now, when February 1st rolls around, you're going to be downloading transactions or importing them somehow. And if that amount is right, then it'll get matched. It'll then go to cleared. The little star will go away because it won't be in the future anymore. And everything is fine and dandy. Now, the other workflow that a lot of people do is they have their scheduled transaction set up. They want to be reminded about it, but they don't post it. They don't go to the confirm scheduled transactions here and hit the post button before it comes down. And so what happens is it gets downloaded from the bank, and the amount might be, let's say that it's, $204.11. And then they go back to they look at the confirmed scheduled transactions, and they would go, oh, shoot, that transaction already came down, but I never posted it. Now, I know this says March 1st just because we already posted the February 1st one, but let's just pretend that that still said February 1st. In that case, it's like, oh, this transaction already came down, but it's right here. I don't want to post it again because then I'll just have a duplicate. Besides, that's not even quite the right amount, right? So in that case, you just hit skip. And then it's done and gone until the next time comes around. And so you'll see in this example, I posted February, I skipped March, and so the next one, isn't going to be till April. So that's just kind of like, that's a common workflow, a common scenario that you can experience when you're working with scheduled transactions. Now, I do want to say on iOS, due to some structural differences in how we built the apps, in iOS, if you go to post a scheduled transaction, it looks for possible matches and say, hey, we might have a match here. Are you sure you want to post it, or does it match one of these? And that's just a cool feature about iOS. We don't have that in Mac yet. It seems like an easy thing to implement, but really it has to do with some, significantly different architectures in those screens, and something we want to address at some point, but they are different now. It's just different behavior. All right, so let me jump back to the demo, back to my slides. Now I want to go through another example that's a little more complex, and this came from a customer's question. Let's say you have an Amazon Prime bill, and you've been paying it on the 15th of every year since 2013 for $100. Then in late 2020, you receive some credits. For whatever reason, Amazon, hey, you know what? You get 3 months free of Amazon Prime. And so now your new due date is January 15th. So I'm going to do a demo right now that's going to show you two things. First, it's going to show you how you edit an existing scheduled transaction is change the parameters, not just post it or skip it, but change the parameters of the scheduled transaction. And specifically, I'm going to cover how you can change the date to make it to get it to do the right thing and do what you want to do. So let me bring up my stuff I need for this example. Close that window. Bring up my Amazon example. Okay. So you'll see here that here is my existing scheduled transaction for Amazon. And let's say that it's been posting every year since 2013. And it last posted, I'll just go back here, it last posted October 15th of 2020. And it's next going to post October 15th of 2021. But we got some credits. And now we know that that date really should be January 15th, 2021. So you can click on the date that you see here and you get this popover where you can edit the schedules for the scheduled transaction. So you'll notice that here's where we can choose the exact count that it actually posts to. And so in this case, it's my credit card. You can set a parameter here if you want it to stop after a number of posts. And then of course we have it set to remind us 7 days. This is pretty standard. And you can see that here's the schedule. It started way back in October 15th of 2013. And now we want to change that. So I'm going to change that to 2015, 21. You can see that there, and I'm going to hit save. And you're like, okay, great. I know that that happened. It's going to happen January 15th, 2021. And then you look, wait, hold on a second. This is January 15th, 2022. Why did that happen? Well, the reason is because January 15th, 2021, it already happened. So when you edit that schedule, bring it up again. When you edit in here, it's going to find the next iteration in that repeating date to choose as kind of the next date. But now I'm going to show you a trick. There are cases where you say, no, I want this to say January 15th, 2021, right? And you want to force that date to appear. In that case, what you do, you set the next date that you want it to post on, no matter what. If you hold down the Option key and hit save, the app says, hey, you want to change the next due date? So this is different than what the due date the app would calculate. And says this is going to force the next due date to be January 15th, 2021. And you say yes. And then boom, you'll see that it's January 15th, 2021. Your confirmed scheduled transactions is now badged with this little one saying, hey, you have one scheduled transaction that we're reminding you about. And it is this overdue Amazon Prime one now for January 15th, 2021. And so now you could choose to post that or skip that. I did say that in this demo, we would talk about how to just edit some of the other properties about a scheduled transaction. And so I just want to remind everybody, you can double click here and you can change the payee, the category, add a note, split it, and so on. So you can also just add those values by double clicking it, just like you would a regular transaction. So that is that demo. Let me jump back to the slides. Okay, I'm going to move on to reconciling because we only have so much time. We got a lot of material to cover. I'm sure there'll be some questions about scheduled transactions, and I'll do my best to cover those after I present on reconciling here. So I want to point out, reconciling is available on Mac and iOS now. For the longest time, you could only do it on the Mac, and now you can also reconcile on your iPhone or iPad. So why does somebody want to reconcile their finances? Well, the whole point is to verify that the money you think you have and where your money went from and came from matches what the bank says you have, right? It matches the bank's records. And ultimately, this can help you identify discrepancies. So here are just a couple of kind of reconcile best practices, and we're going to jump into a demo here in a minute. So I encourage everybody just to keep up with their finances in Banktivity daily. And if you can't do it daily, at least try and do it weekly. Import your transactions, clean them up, do what you need to do to make them, meet your needs with the right categories and so on. And then monthly, you're going to reconcile against your bank's statement, right? And it's important that the whole reason why we reconcile against a bank statement is because they're saying on a specific date, this is what your balance was. And then at some other time, this is what your balance was at that end date, right? So they're giving you 2 dates and 2 balances. And it allows you to go through and make sure that your records match those records for that same finite period of time and those same exact changes in the balances. Whoops. My slides double skipped. So double skipped. So after once it is time to reconcile against your bank statement, we're essentially saying, okay, now I want to make sure that the records that I'm keeping really match the bank's records, right? And you're kind of coming full circle. So here's the same best practices put into a common workflow. You're importing new transactions in Banktivity daily or weekly, or entering them manually. Most of these transactions are cleared at the bank, but some could be pending depending on how they're downloading, or if you're manually entering some transactions, and if they don't match up with what you import, they could still be they could show up in Banktivity as pending. And just to remind everybody, how do you tell a difference, right? If you see a circle there and the top part of the transaction, the font is bold, that means it is uncleared. If you see the check mark, that means it's cleared at the bank. Now, some people think, well, why isn't this just good enough, right? This check mark means that it cleared at the bank. And you know what? For a lot of people, sure, that is good enough. That's fine. I know not everybody reconciles against their bank statements, but if you want to come full circle and have really immaculate records, then you go back through and you reconcile and make sure everything that you're doing really matches what the bank's doing. So it's time to reconcile. What do? You go out and you gather a bank statement, right? This used to be something that came printed on a piece of paper and arrived in your mailbox, and you would open it up. Some people probably still get their statements that way. Pretty much every bank that I know of, you just log into their bank's website and you can look at your statements there. And then you begin the reconcile process in Banktivity to match up your records to the bank's, look for discrepancies, and kind of close the loop, go full circle with your records and make sure everything is really tight. So I'm going to do a quick demo, and I'm going to show you how you reconcile against a statement. And I'm also going to show you how to do a catch-all statement, and sort of this is what we call it internally, and why you would want to do that. So jump back to Banktivity. Let me pull up the right document. All right, so I have a Banktivity file here. This is just called basic reconcile because it shows, this is a very simplified document, but the whole point is to kind of show you the process. So we have one account here. It's a credit card. And we have some transactions going back a couple of different years. And this looks great. A bunch of transactions have cleared at the bank. One hasn't cleared at the bank. And now you decide, I want to reconcile with my bank statements and verify that what the bank is saying about my finances matches what I think is going on with my finances. So you'll notice that there is a statements button up here. you can click this and you'll see all your past statements. In this case, this account has never been reconciled, so I can click this button to make a new statement. From the transaction screen, you can also just hit this reconcile button, and that'll just immediately drop you into the reconcile flow. I'm going to go to statements, click the blue button here, and you'll notice that the first step in reconciling is entering in information about the start date, the balance on that starting date, the end date, and the ending balance. Now, in this case, Banktivity did a pretty good job of guessing what month you want to reconcile, what the dates are. It found the first of the month and the end of the month. It looked at your existing balances there and said, hey, according to our records, it looks like it should be negative 1,300 and the ending balance is negative 1,525 for a total change in $225. Turns out this is all right. But what you would do here is look at your bank statement and compare it and say, oh no, the bank says I had 16, a credit card amount of $1,600 for this account. A credit card balance of $1,600, and so you would change that to match what the statement says. And if these dates are different, you would change that as well. Okay, the next option we have here is this automatically select. So this is a way to help you kind of just jumpstart the reconcile process depending on what you. So if you choose no transactions, when we go to the next screen, it's not going to pre-select any transactions to be on this statement. If you choose all transactions, then it's going to grab all the transactions that are between these dates and those that have not already been reconciled, right? You don't want one transaction that was reconciled once to get reconciled again. That's not good bookkeeping. Or you can say, you know what, just the transactions that have been marked cleared between those dates. So I'll choose this one for this example. Depending on what depending on your needs and your flow, you have some options there. I'll hit next. And so it found the one cleared transaction between those dates, and it put a check mark next to it for us. And this check mark means, hey, this transaction belongs on this statement that we are creating right now. I'm reconciling this transaction to this statement. Now you'll notice that it says here that we're missing $125. If you see this, it means that there are some transactions in here that you either need to check off or uncheck, because what you really want to do is get this to say missing 0 and show the nice green check mark. And so in this case, oh, I'm missing $125. I know I'm reconciling for all of January. Here's a transaction for $125 that's in January. It must be this one. Click. And now, and you'll notice you get the green check mark and we're all good to go. Now, when you're reconciling on your bank statement, let's pretend I'm looking at my bank statement here off screen that you can't see. You would want to make sure that there are 2 transactions on the statement, one for 100 and one for 125, because it's possible that your bank statement is saying, yeah, there's one for $100, but there's also one for 25, and then another one for 50, and then another one for 50. And it's really some other transactions that you either need to enter into this screen right, here, or some other ones you need to select that aren't visible right now. So yes, you want to get this green check mark to appear and the missing needs to be 0, but you got to do it by checking off the right transactions that appear on your statement, not just any transaction that's going to make the math work. Okay, so I'm going to hit save. And you'll see now under the statements tab, we have a statement for January 2021. Got a little bit of metadata here. It shows what the balances were and indicating that there are 2 transactions. You can see these transactions by using this disclosure button. And these are, you can edit these transactions if you want. You'll get, if you actually try and change the amount, you'll get a warning. And then you'll also notice that these transactions have a double check mark. That double check mark means that they have been reconciled, right? It's not just saying, oh, it cleared to the bank, it didn't clear to the bank. You're saying, hey, I've matched this to a statement. And now if you go back to the regular transactions view, you'll notice that they have the double check mark there as well. And if you actually click that check mark, it'll ask you if you want to edit this this statement for this transaction. So it's a way to jump directly to the statement editor if you want. That's just kind of a nice little feature that's new in 8. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the second part of this demo, and that is showing you how you would do the catch-all statement. Now, why would you want to do this? The reason is when you go and reconcile an account, you're going to see every single transaction that is not associated with a statement. So I'll bring up this. Let me bring up the example I was just in. We go to statements, and let's just edit this statement. Go next. See how there are several transactions here? I see the 2 that are reconciled, but there's also these other ones. If you're importing data, let's say from a competitor or a lot of old data going back, a year and a half, but you only want to start reconciling from January 1st, every time you go to reconcile, you're going to be faced with all these old transactions, and they're always going to be in your way, and you're always going to have to be, like, wait, is this the one I want to check off? Nope, that's the old one. Okay, so the catch-all statement lets you basically create one statement, and it's just a regular statement. We just call it a catch-all because it catches all your historical transactions that you aren't really interested in, and you're just kind of saying, you know what, these are reconciled. I'm done with these. I only want to focus on some of these more recent ones. So let me show you how to do that. So we're back to our old trusty demo file, the My Finances. I'm going to go to the primary Visa. I'm going to select transactions, and you'll see, we have a lot of transactions in here going back to 2017, 2016. But let's say, you're like this year, going back to January, this is the year that I'm going to reconcile everything, and I'm going to have immaculate, immaculate records. I'm going to show you how you can do a catch-all statement to get rid of that other stuff. So first, I'm going to open up this same window, all this information in another window. And so I'm going to hold down the control key, click primary Visa, and I'm going to hit open in new window. And now you'll see I have a list of all those transactions in the primary Visa in this window here. Try and shrink that down. And then I'm going to go over to statements. I'm going to have to shrink this down a little bit more. There we go. And I'm going to make a new statement. Now it's trying to be smart and say, hey, it looks like you want to reconcile, January. In this case, you're like, no, I'm doing the catch-all. I need to go way back. So let's go way back. When was our first transaction? Wow, it was back in July of 2008. Well, I want my records just to be tidy. So I'm going to say, we're going to go back and reconcile all the way to July 1st, 2008. And we're going to end on 12/31/2020, right? So that's going to reconcile all those old transactions. Now, the balance of the account was 12/30/29 on the 2nd. So that means on the 1st, the balance was $0. So we didn't have any money back then. And the ending balance, I got to scroll up here and actually see what was the ending balance on 12/31. And I can see it was, the closest transaction I had was on 12/28, and that ending balance was 58 0927. And now I'm going to say, hey, you know what? Just select all the transactions. I don't want to have to sit here and click the checkbox going back, 12 years. And I'm going to hit next. And you're going to see that it just automatically selected all these transactions. I entered all the right information in, so the missing amount is 0, and I'm going to hit save. Right? So we have here our catch-all statement. It's one massive statement that spans multiple years. It has over 400 transactions. And so what that means is going forward, when you make a new statement, let's just going to try and do January again, there's way less transactions that you have to deal with in here. You can make this window bigger if you want as well, and it'll remember the size the next time. So anyways, that is how you make the catch-all statement. And it's a really good tool if you want to kind of get caught up. Maybe catch-up statement might be even a better term for that. All right, so I'm going to close this and jump back to my slides. Talk about a couple conclusions, then we'll go to questions. So we covered scheduled transactions, right? And whether or not you want to be reminded about them or not, and what that means. Basically, reminded means you're going to have to take action on them. And the type of action you're going to take is either you're going to tell the app to post it to an account or to skip it. Scheduled transactions do sync between Mac and iOS. If you post it on one or skip on one, that should all sync up. When we covered reconciling, right, it's really, you end up with really good records. You really close the loop based on, hey, I think I'm tracking everything that my bank account is doing. And then you go back and look at the statement, which is essentially your bank putting a stake in the ground and being like, look, this is how much money you have between this date and that date. And we know that this is the amount of money because here are all the specific transactions that occurred between those two dates. Statements also sync between Mac and iOS, and new in iOS 8 is the ability to actually edit statements and reconcile on iPhone and iPad. So with that, I'm going to open it up to some questions. All right. Okay, Joy asks, how do you end a scheduled transaction so it does not affect the budget? I'm going to show you the best way to do that. Let's go to my bill setup example. I just have to do a little bit of window management here. The best thing to do, and I will admit this is clunkier than I would like it to be, but it is what it is right now, is you, let's say after the 4th, you don't want this scheduled transaction to post anymore. This credit card to AT&T, maybe you're switching, you're getting rid of your cell phone, you've had enough. You can go here and just say, hey, stop after one more time. And then when you hit save, I guess because that one's in the future, it goes away and it won't show up anymore. And so that is the best. One of the things I would like to have is a ability just to say, end this scheduled transaction. I'm done with this. So that's the best way to do that, is just to say, stop. Don't stop repeating after some number, and then that'll work. All right. Someone says, hey, Pat says, I don't want to change the scheduled date that repeats, just the upcoming transaction. So this is another question about scheduled transactions. And the time to change, so you can change the underlying scheduled transaction, right? Let's say this Amazon Prime amount isn't $75 anymore. Let's say it's 100. You can change it there. And then when you look at this in the confirm scheduled transaction sheet, it's going to say $100. But let's say you're going to post it and you're looking at you know, your bank's website, or for whatever reason, you know, there's like, it's not $100, it's $100.02. You can double click it, enter the 2, save it, and then when you post this, the underlying scheduled transaction stays the same, right? This didn't change to $100.02. So when you edit it in this confirmed scheduled transaction sheet, you're just editing the amount right before you post it. Paul asks, is there a published reference manual? We don't have a manual for version 8, but the built-in help has a lot of content in there. So go to help, Banktivity help, and you can browse it there. Okay, look through some more questions. Someone asks, if I set up a scheduled, so Aileen asks, I want to say someone, Aileen says, if you set up a scheduled transaction to pay from your main checking account, then the category, Verizon Visa, is the account it needs to clear from, correct? Then you would put the category, cell phone, in that account, Verizon Visa, on the charge to track the amount you spend on the cell phone, correct? This is how I do almost all my scheduled transactions. This is a process question, and I think I understand it. I mean, the right way to, the right way to track how much you're paying for your, okay, you have a Verizon Visa and a cell phone. Okay, so let's say this is your cell phone here. Sorry, this is your credit card account, and you pay your cell phone from it. I would set up a scheduled transaction for paying that cell phone bill, right? Just we did that in one of the examples, and that is the one that that you are going to post or skip, kind of depending on your workflow, or not even be reminded about it and let it just come down into the app through your importing process. And then when you pay your Visa, yes, you would make a transfer from your checking account to your Visa. You could set that up as a scheduled transaction or not. If you are, if you're in credit card debt and you're trying to pay it off over time, then I would probably set it up for a scheduled transaction based on how much you can pay off. Or if it varies a lot, I wouldn't set that up as a scheduled transaction, and that would just be a transfer that you're gonna track in the app, as they occur. All right, scheduled rental. This is Charles asks, scheduled rental income. How do you post? Okay, so let's say you have a rental. Let me go back to this document because it's a little more realistic. This is my finances. I'm going to go to payee schedules and rules, and let's say I'm going to create a new scheduled transaction for this income of rental. Let's say you get $1,000 a month, and it's rental. I'm going to give it a new category, rental income. The app is going to say, hey, we don't recognize this category, so do you want to create it? And I'm going to say, yeah, but it's not an expense. This is income. Add category. It's going to be a deposit into my checking account, and I get paid, let's say, on the 5th of every month, and let's see, $1,000, and I'm going to hit done. The way you would post this is, again, go to the confirm schedule transactions, and there is the rental income. You could hit post. It would create this exact transaction on January 5th. All the specs here would get posted to your checking account. That's what that little arrow indicates here, that, hey, this is going into your checking account as income. And that's how you would post it, right? If you forgot to post it, let's say you're on vacation and you come back and you download your transactions and you see that that $1,000 deposit already showed up in the app. You went to checking and you're like, oh, it's already there. Okay, it's already there. Then you would go to confirm scheduled transactions and say, you know what, for this month, just skip it, and you'd hit skip. Okay, Glenn asks, if your phone bill increases by say $100 and you make this change in the scheduled transactions window, will this change of the increased amount be reflected in your budget for previous periods prior to the change? Or should you edit the scheduled transaction in the edit budget window? You can change it either place, and it is going to only affect that amount going forward. So if you went to Payee Schedules and Rules and you wanted to change this to $150, it is January currently. If you were to go look at your budget, it's going to show that this is $150 in January. But if you go back in time, there's a there's that $150. But if you go back a month, it's going to show. No, it didn't track it. I wasn't ready for that part of the demo. I have to dig deeper into why that. It's possible you have to edit it through the budget, but I didn't think so. It's also, there are some caveats around when we decide, hey, only track this change going forward versus always versus don't track it. Someone wants to know, how do you delete a duplicate scheduled transaction? This is Linda. You go to Payee Schedules and Rules, choose the one that you don't want, and just hit the delete key, and it'll say, hey, do you want to delete all this? And you can choose yes or no. Brett asked, can you set the scheduled transaction value when you get the bill for the next post date, or do you only have to do it just before you post? You can change it in here when you're looking at your Payee Schedules and Rules. You have the scheduled transactions selected. You can edit it here, and that edits the underlying, payee information, and then. So we just changed AT&T to 150, and so when you go up here to confirm scheduled transactions, it's going to show you that it's 150. So if you wanted to each month change it in here, you absolutely can. Okay, let me find another one. Bill asks, if I schedule transactions, is there any way to send it to my bank's bill paying function? Or is this just to track automatic debits or else save as a reminder to pay the bill? So it's mostly the latter, Bill. It's to track the automatic debits and have a reminder to pay the bill. If you have a checking account that supports OFX bill pay, and there are starting to be less and less banks that do this, you can pay them through the app. And so if you go to confirm scheduled transactions, let's say that my joint checking was set up to use the OFX bill pay, I would click this pay online button. But right, I don't have any setup, so it's, hey, you don't have any setup. The number of banks that support that decreases, every year. Brian asks, have you considered a file location to store the bank statements under the statements button? Currently, I just place the document on the last transaction in the statement, but a separate location under the statements would be ideal. Yeah, it's a good idea. We have considered it. It's something that just, we haven't, it hasn't gone up high enough in the priority list to actually get it done yet. And I just want to point out, I'm not going to be able to answer everybody's questions. So I'm sorry, don't get mad at me if I don't answer your question. There's it looks like hundreds here. Valerie brings up a good point. Please remind users to put the negative sign in front of numbers when reconciling a credit card account. Took me a long time to realize this. Yes, this is true. That is a great reminder. Your credit card, whenever you have a balance on your credit card, it's negative, right? It's money you owe. And so when you're reconciling, you're usually reconciling across two different negative numbers. And so, a balance of $1,000 you owe versus a balance of $800 you owe, but it's always negative. So put those negative signs in there. Bob asks, category change. Does it change previous entries or going forward with new ones? This is a little bit off topic, but it's worth talking about because the answer is easy. If you change a category name, so here are my categories. I went to settings, categories. This is linked to all transactions and scheduled transactions. So if you change one of these, it will change across all those transactions as well. So we have telephone, cellular, right? If we change that to mobile, when you went and looked at all your transactions that used to say telephone, cellular for the category, they would then say mobile. I'm looking at Jacqueline's question. It says, can I schedule some bills in my checking, but using a Visa? I track my Visa in the checking with splits. So will those splits that are tax related show up when I have my actual Visa bill that posts? Will those individual items show up in the monthly bill on my bank statement? I'm not sure I fully understand this question, but I would strongly suggest that don't track the Visa in the checking account. Set up the Visa in the app and track every time you use the Visa card. That's a new transaction. You can split those or not, how you want, and then when you pay that Visa, you're going to capture that in Banktivity as a transfer. So I think I have an example here. I'm looking at this Visa account. Yeah, so here on January 12th, in this sample file, I paid down this Visa $2,000 from my joint checking. And this little arrow indicates that it's a transfer. It came out of my joint checking into this account. And if I look at the other side of the transaction in the checking account, you can see it's a $2,000 withdrawal from the checking account that goes to the Visa. BJ asks, any capability to create notes or reminders in the app? I think the answer here is kind of yes and no. If you double click an account, you can enter some notes about that account if you want. Similarly, when you edit a transaction, you can enter some notes about what that transaction was all about. But there's not a designated place that's based on notes and reminders. Tom, I'd love to see the category icon when reconciling and make it easier to find the right transaction. Any plans to add that as an option? I chose this question and I paused because this is actually something we've kind of talked about a couple of different times. What I think is the most likely, let me go, yeah, so here are some unreconciled. Here are some statements that are not balanced. I'll just point out these examples here. Missing. These are test ones that I made a long time ago. I'm going to bring up the scheduled transaction editor. There's not a lot of space here for the minimum size that we support. What I feel like would be bringing the image in. Some people don't use the images at all, so it wouldn't help them. But what I have considered is showing just what category each transaction was, maybe in some gray text here. And when this is closed, it's truncated, but if you make it bigger, it shows up there. So that's something that we have tossed around, but we haven't done that yet. John says, I'm unable to catch all the transactions. Can you post the steps again? Let me go to actually, I'll stick with this file, John. I don't have the steps posted, but what you want to do is essentially, you're going to create a statement. Let's go back to my catch-all statement, right? That it goes back to the first of the month before you had any transactions at all. So in this Visa account, I opened this one up in a separate window so I could look at it at the same time while I'm reconciling. So I right-clicked on it or control-clicked on it, said, hey, open a new window. Here are all the transactions. I went all the way down to the beginning of time and said, okay, my first transaction was July 2nd in 2008. And so then I put the start date to July 1st and filled in the data. And then I'm not going to spend too much time on it because I just realized, we'll post this video up and you'll be able to watch it again and follow through a little slower. Glenn asks, is the software smart enough to recognize a manual entry to be scheduled transaction and accordingly indicate that this scheduled transaction should be posted? I think the answer is no. The closest it gets is on iOS or Mac. If you go to take action, if you on iPhone or iPad, if you go to take action on a scheduled transaction and you choose the post option, it looks for some existing things and says, hey, looks like you might have already, we might already know about this transaction. Are you sure you want to post it? David says, hey, find search in a specific selected account would be useful. Hey, you know what? You can do that. Choose your account here, go up here to the search terms and type away. So I just typed in ACE, it'll search the name, the category, the amount, super useful. $102, I had one transaction for $102. And then if you want to search across all your accounts, you go up to here to find 102. Again, it searches everything, found 2 results, and it shows you which account the results are in. Sylvan, or maybe it might be Sylvan, says, hey, I had to change the start balance to reflect the bank account after I reconciled many statements. Now the starting balance transaction is not checked. How can I do that? I think the answer is just to find the single statement that's not right. So if when you go to select your account and you go to statements, you'll see a list of all your statements, and it sounds like maybe one of them will show this missing badge, indicating that there's something, and an exclamation point indicating it's not balanced. And then I think you're going to want to just edit that one to reflect the new start balance. So you could go here and change that start balance. Let's see what else. Joan asked, this is back earlier on, every time I open Banktivity, I get prompted for a bunch of MFA questions. And like I said earlier on, go to Preferences, under the Banktivity menu, Preferences, go to Import, and tell it you don't want to automatically update bank transactions. And then you get to control when the update happens by clicking this button. That makes it a little less painful. The MFA is yeah, it's the battle of you know, how much security banks want to have, and it's a little bit out of our hands. We have thought about ways to make it easier, but you know, it definitely happens. Okay, Mark wants to know what happens to the history if you delete a scheduled transaction. If you delete a scheduled transaction, it deletes all the history. Elaine asks, if you delete a scheduled transaction, does it delete the payee? Yes. In fact, so let me just jump back to the payees. Regardless of if you have payee selected, the scheduled transactions, or the import rules, when you delete one of these, I'll just select this one, hit delete key. It says, hey, we're going to permanently delete this transaction template for Amazon. All related current and historical schedules and import rules will also be deleted. This may affect your budget. This operation cannot be undone. So whenever you delete something from one of these three screens, it's going to delete the import rules and the schedules associated with that payee. To delete individual import rules or the schedules, you can go here and delete a schedule if you want with the plus button, minus button there. Let's see, I'll try and take two more. George says, when reconciling my online statements, my bank statements are PDFs. I used to be able to view those PDFs within Banktivity on the Mac via the built-in browser, but they're no longer viewable. Is this feature removed, or is it a bug on my end? We did not remove that feature. My guess is that your bank changed something about its website so that when you click on the PDF, it's saying, it's suggesting, hey, download this file, as opposed to try and render it in the view. Yeah, so I don't have a good solution for there. You're probably best off, using using Safari or Chrome and looking at it there, or downloading it from there and then opening it in preview. All right. John asks, how do you change the date of a future scheduled transaction? Do you create a new one and delete the old one? No, I tried to cover this in the example. I think the best way, I wouldn't create, delete, and recreate, is to go to scheduled transactions. You can click this date right here. This will bring up this little popover where you can edit some information about the schedule, like which account it posts to. And if you want to change the date, just change it right in here to what you want. There's a little date picker even. And then it will find the next date in that pattern and present that to you. But if you want to put a stake in the ground and say, no, absolutely use this date, the masterclass trick of the day is hold down the Option key and then hit save. And it'll say, hey, do you want to change this? You want us to force the due date to be this date? And you could say, yeah, change it or not. I'm going to hit cancel because I don't want to do that right now. Mike wants to know, how do you get that split screen in the catch-all statement? So select the account. In my vernacular, I call it right click, because I'm used to when I used to have a 2-button mouse. But you're going to bring up the contextual menu for this sidebar. And so to bring up the contextual menu, if you just have a trackpad, is you hold down the control key and click, and then you can see this open a new window. So that's going to open that account in a new separate window. Super powerful thing, super cool. All right. Let's see. I'm gonna take one more and then we'll call it. That's a good hour and 20 minutes. All right, maybe I'll do two. This Charles just says, negligently, I've not reconciled for months. How do I catch up? Charles, you can either go back and create reconciled create statements for all the ones you missed, or you can do the catch-all trick, right? The catch-up one, where you create one big statement that covers many months, and you're gonna have to kind of decide based on what your bank said and where you are, what that start balance should be. Try and find one more good. All right. One more about reconciling that's kind of related. Gene says, when we start to reconcile, we didn't do it since like 2 years. What will happen? So those transactions from 2 years ago will always appear as unreconciled when you're reconciling a statement. And so you're always going to have to deal with them. Right? You're always going to have to deal with transactions going back years and years and years, unless you create this catch-up statement or a catch-all statement that I did here that spans many years and sort of culls all those transactions out of the list of unreconciled transactions, so they're out of the way. Okay, last question is from Kristen. She asked, can you schedule transactions without the amount like a utility that's higher or lowest based on monthly usage? To be honest, I don't know exactly what is going to happen if you set up a scheduled transaction without an amount. My guess is that it just won't have an amount and the system will do what it does. But what I would recommend is you set up an amount that you think it's roughly going to be, and maybe it changes between summer and winter and the seasons. Your utilities often do. But let's say it's maybe about $200. I would just enter that $200 in. That way in your budget, you don't have a zero amount showing up for utilities, and it'll be like, yeah, it's about $200. And then just change it, change it when appropriate, either before posting it, or change the underlying scheduled transaction if you want your budget to reflect a more accurate number depending on the season. All right, I hope this has helped everybody. I'm going to wrap it up from now. I will get the next session, the topic finalized and posted at banktivity.com webinars, and you should be able to sign up there later today. I'll send out the reminder email. If you have questions about that specific topic, send it to the webinars address. I'm not going to be able to reply to every single person. If you have a question that's not about those topics, I strongly encourage you to go to our support. We have been very busy, but we're making great progress and getting caught up. But it's better than sending an email about a technical issue to the webinars box, because it almost certainly won't get addressed there. So thanks again for attending, and I hope I see you all again next week. Have a great rest of the week. Have a great weekend when that finally rolls around, and I'll see you all soon.